So welcome to our look at our reading from last Sunday, Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 to 23. This is the last part of the Christmas story. Jesus has been born. The wise men have come and worshipped Jesus. Inadvertently, they've let a homicidal, tyrant, murderous king know that a new king has arrived, as we looked at last week. And what we're going to look at now is what happens when the Magi leave and the sort of fallout from Christmas. Because yes, Christmas is a time of peace and joy and goodwill to all mankind, but it's also a time of terror, of confusion and danger, which at least for once and for all settles the fact that Die Hard is definitely a Christmas film. But the reason it's about those things is because we've said the light has shone in the darkness, and sometimes we only focus on the light, but it really shone in a dark place. What we read is that when they'd gone, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." Herod is this pretty horrific leader. He's killed everyone who stands in his way. To be honest, this kind of genocide is just a footnote in the kind of awful things that he did in his life. He's known as Herod the Great, and I think in the words of the philosopher Ollivander from Harry Potter 1. He did great things, terrible but great. He rebuilt the nation. He had built a dynasty out of his family from nothing. He had kind of business monopolies all over the place. But he was an awful person. He killed even his own sons when he thought they were a threat. So Joseph, he hears this and he gets up and he goes, takes the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt, where he stayed there until the death of Herod. And this is the first prophecy that's fulfilled, what the Lord said concerning the prophet, "Out of Egypt I've called my son." Now we realize what happens when Herod, this horrific leader, realizes that the wise men have stopped taking his calls. When Herod realized that he'd been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity of 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he'd learned from the Magi. It's genocidal. It's pretty horrific. Some of the artwork that is inspired by this is quite hard to look at. There's a mother trying to defend her child. The more you think about it, the more awful it is. But what the writer's trying to get through to us is that the light really has shone in the darkness, that God didn't come to a winter wonderland, he came to a war zone. And if he can make his purposes work in that place, then he can definitely make them work in your life. We then read, "This is what was said through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." Now we'll come back to that later on, but we then read what happens. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead." So he got up, took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in the place of his father, he was afraid to go there, and probably rightly so. Archelaus was kind of said to be just as violent, but a lot less competent. He actually gets thrown out by the Romans in about 6 AD. So having been warned in a dream to return to the district of Galilee, he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. So really what this passage is doing, what Matthew the writer is trying to do here, is contrast two different kings. The focus of the story goes from Joseph to Herod and then back to Joseph. But really it isn't contrasting, hey, don't be like Herod, be like Joseph. That would kind of just be sort of moralism. It's saying Joseph has seen something. He's seen something in Jesus that means that he knows that he is worth everything. And he gives his life to him. But first, if we take a look at Herod. Herod is this horrific king. He does all these bad things, but the passage doesn't want us to point the finger at Herod. Really, it wants us to look within. See, this story is a reverse of the Passover. In the Passover story, the people of God were in Egypt. The king of Egypt kills their sons, and so God takes them to Israel. In this story, they're in Israel, and the king of Israel kills the newborn son, so that he takes the chosen people to Egypt. It's a reverse of that story. And really what it's trying to get us to think about is the fact that in the first story, in the Passover, the terror is an external king. But in this story, the terror is an internal king. It's for us to look within. We all have an internal Herod. We all have an internal king who does not want to let go of our power. But what we see is it's not a good way to live your life. First of all, it's not continuous. Herod does all this. He kills all the 2-year-olds and under to try and stay in power. 3 verses later we read, after Herod died. Like, Herod's dead. Like, this isn't a continuous way to run your life. It's also not a competent way. As I said before, he kills all the baby boys, and actually that's what his son Archelaus does later on, but actually that causes him to be deposed. Like, Herod is playing on risky ground, but it's also not kind. It's not kind to, obviously, the people that he kills, but it's also not kind to himself. And you see that in the life of Herod. But you see that in leaders who lead in this way. They're unable to give themselves the mercy and the empathy that they need. Now, contrasted to this, we have the king worth everything, who is Jesus. And what we see in Joseph's life is what happens when you follow when you follow Jesus. So we read, when they'd gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt." And really there you have 3 things that are sort of challenge for us. The first thing that Joseph is asked to give up, as he gets up, is his peace. So he got up and left for Egypt. He leaves behind his career, his security, probably all of his possessions. And the thing is, when you become a follower of Jesus, you get a new peace, but you also get a new strife. You get a new peace. You get forgiveness. You get an identity. You get freedom from fear. But you get a new strife because, first of all, internally, before you were a Christian, you used to be able to you just put yourself first. But now you have a new nature that fights against the old nature to put Jesus first. But so that means there's an internal strife. That's what temptation is. It's the tension between wanting to follow Jesus and wanting to follow King Me. But there's also an external strife. And many in our church experience this, that when you try and follow Jesus, there are people who do not look like that. Like Herod, they push back and they try and fight against it. But the good news is, this is normal. It is normal to experience strife. And because of your faith, there will be moments where you experience persecution, you experience strife because of your faith. Now, it is also worth here saying that there are moments of strife, but there's also moments of peace. Here we're told that Joseph is told to get up and escape. When he's told the same thing a few verses later, he's just told to get up and go. The first one has this sense of running away, but the second one is just sort of a more casual. Jesus' life was not all strife. So if your whole life is strife, it's probably not necessarily just because you're a follower of Jesus. It might be because you're not particularly sensitive to other people. Maybe just put that out there. Maybe I'll ask a friend about that. There are seasons of peace. There are seasons of strife as we follow Jesus. So the first question I want to leave you with is where are you facing strife in your life now? That's a nice little rhyme. Where are you facing strife in your life now? Internally, externally. What I want you to do is, on Post-it notes, write that down and then put them all in the middle. And then as a group, you're going to pray about that. So where are you facing strife in your life now? Internal and external, especially focusing on strife because of your following of Jesus. So I hope you found that helpful, praying for one another. The first thing that Joseph gives up is his peace. The second thing is that he gives up his options. We see this said to Joseph. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother. See, when Joseph takes up this child and his mother, he's limiting his life. But as we saw before, you die into life. There's a weird thing, this is sort of mirrored in this bit about the prophecy of Rachel weeping for her children. Rachel was one of the matriarchs of the people of Israel, and she actually died in childbirth. She gave up her life so that a descendant of Jesus could be born, and through that the Messiah comes. And obviously Jesus dies so that we can have life. And in the same way, he asks Herod to limit his options, to take this child and mother. In that moment, he gives up his options and he chooses to adopt Jesus as his son and all the responsibilities that come from being a father. He takes up the responsibility of being a faithful husband. It limits his options, but as we see, it enlarges his life. And we wouldn't have even heard of Joseph if it wasn't for this. So the second question I want to leave you with is, where in the past has the Lord asked you to limit your options? Where in the past has the Lord asked you to limit your options? And I want you to share that with one another and talk about the way that that's played out and where you've seen God bless you having made that kind of sacrifice. And also following from that, what decisions are you going to have to make this year? Because when you make a decision, you limit your options. I'd love you to share the decisions that you've got coming up with the group in the next year. So Joseph is asked to give up his peace, he's asked to give up his options, but lastly he's asked to give up striving. It says, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Escape to Egypt. And the fascinating thing about this is God doesn't want his strength. He doesn't want Joseph to stay and fight. He wants him to flee and run away. In fact, the word there for escape is the word fugi, where we get the word refugee. He wants him to become a refugee. We have to remember, whenever we're considering refugees, when we're considering migration and political discussion or any kind of discussion, our Lord chose to become a refugee. He voluntarily entered into that. Whenever you see a refugee, you are seeing what Christ entered into. Whenever you do anything for a refugee, you're doing this for the least of these. And there are no simple answers. But it's something we have to hold in prayer and remember. This is incredibly political, everything that Jesus does here. He gives up. He asked Joseph to give up his strength and run to Egypt. But then also when he comes back, he could have gone anywhere when he come back, but instead he ends up in Nazareth. And as we looked at before, Nazareth is not a great place. Nazareth is not a place you'd choose to live in. It is where the poor people are, the uninfluential, probably the unimportant and dull people live. If we're speaking bluntly, Philip, when he hears that Jesus has come and claimed to be the Messiah, he's like, from Nazareth? Could anything good come from Nazareth? I don't know what place you're thinking of now, but every country has a Nazareth, and that's where Jesus chose to come from. He does not choose strength, he chooses weakness. See, I think that's the thing. The question that this should cause us to ask is, what did Joseph see that caused him to realize that Jesus was a king worth everything? Jesus is the king worth everything, but how could he know that? And I think what he sees is he sees that God doesn't ask us to do anything that he's not willing to do himself. You know what? There's no easy answers to pain. No easy answers to the violence we encounter. No easy answers to the violence we see in this passage. All the young boys, like the terror captured in that piece of artwork's face. There are no easy answers that satisfy the question that is raised by this passage. And it stops us from doing so. In the passage it says, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted. Glib answers won't do. But what we do know is this, and Dorothy Sayers puts it wonderfully. She says, I don't know why God hasn't stopped evil and suffering, but I do know that it's not because he doesn't love us. We know because he was willing to get involved. The incarnation means that for whatever reason God chose to let us fall into suffering, to be subject to sorrows and death, he nonetheless had the honesty and courage to take his own medicine. He himself has gone through the whole human experience, from the trivial irritations of family life, the cramping restrictions of hard work and lack of money, to the worst horrors and pain and humiliation, despair and death. He was born in poverty, and he suffered in infinite pain for us, and he thought it well worth his while. Jesus gave up his peace. He entered human conflict. He gave up his options. When he entered, the only way out was the cross, and he gave up his strength. He became willing to become weak. And the amazing thing is, do you know what? Those words there, get up, that's the same words that are used elsewhere in the New Testament to mean resurrection. When you're feeling weak, the words you hear from the Lord are get up, not in your own strengths, but not by taking power like Herod, but by giving your weakness to Jesus, by saying, I can't do it, but in your strength I can, and in faith carrying on. And so really the last question I want to leave us with to think about is, what areas are you weak in? What areas are you weak in? Let me share two of mine. Two of mine areas that I'm having to really focus on at the moment are time management. I'm really not good at my own time management. It's really come to the forefront now I've got kids, because if I don't manage my time well, I miss out on time with my family, and it goes very quickly. Time management is a spiritual discipline. It's something I'm weak in and having to work on. And also another area, if I can share with you, is speaking to myself. I'm not always good at, when things are going tough, at speaking encouragingly to myself. A friend challenged me and said, you should never speak to yourself in a way that you wouldn't speak to a friend in. Because sometimes we're a lot harsher with ourselves. Our internal Herod doesn't allow ourselves to be kind to ourselves in a way that we would easily be kind to others. So I'd love you to share. What areas are you weak in? Write it down on a post-it note first, then put them in the middle. And I want you to do two things. I want everyone to take one of those post-it notes and just commit to pray for that. You don't need to know who it's from. If you want some privacy, you can fold them up, put them in the middle, and everyone put something in. Then take it away and pray for it that week. And maybe before you finish, pray for them aloud in the group. Yeah, you can keep it anonymous if you prefer. But just share, what are those areas that you're weak in that you would love the Lord to receive from you and to bring new life into?